Thank you, George, for a wonderful introduction. I'm extremely grateful to the Carnegie Endowment for the invitation to share my thoughts on Pakistan-India relations post-Indian elections. I think it's a timely discussion as the new government in India has already taken charge under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and obviously the kind of developments which have been taking place in the recent past, the question on the minds of many of people in Pakistan, India, and also South Asia watchers in the US and elsewhere would be the prospect of peace and stability between India and Pakistan. Before I do that, I think what I'll do is that I'll briefly recount some of the recent developments which have taken place in South Asia, particularly between India and Pakistan. First, we need to remember that the history of Pakistan-India relations has not been a glorious one. We have had wars in the last 60, 70 years of our history. We have tensions, we have a history of broken promises, and also a tendency to compete and undermine each other. The tension between India and Pakistan mainly is due to the following factors. One is obviously the unresolved issue of Jammu and Kashmir, occupation of Siachen Glacier by India in 1984, non-resolution of land and maritime boundary in Sir Creek area, water issues, terrorism, etc. These are some of the major issues, but there are also minor issues as well, which we call them as just irritants. In the last 7 decades, we have had dialogue to resolve most of these issues. There have been agreements on some of the issues. For instance, on Siachen, the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan, former Prime Minister late Rajiv Gandhi and late Benazir Bhutto, they signed an agreement in 1988-89, but somehow that could never be implemented. And our understanding is that the Indian Army mainly vetoed the understanding that was reached between the two prime ministers. In the case of Sir Creek, again, there was an agreement. There was a verdict by the Run of Kutch Tribunal, which gave an award initially accepted by both the countries, but later on some new elements were brought in by India later on. But I think despite this history of tension between India and Pakistan, there is a strong realization that we have detected in both the countries that there are strong imperatives for the peace process. And some of the factors contributing to this realization are, one, there is an awareness that there is no military solution to the ongoing disputes. Number two, a decisive war in our region would not be possible because of the nuclear factor. Thirdly, neither country could achieve its economic potential without resolving disputes. Need to manage relations. I think there is a very strong desire on the part of the two countries to manage these relations in a nuclearized South Asia. Desire to meet challenges posed by non-conventional threats such as terrorism, poverty, climate change, food security, etc. A realization also which has been detected by both people in both India and Pakistan, and also I think to some extent in the leadership of the two countries, that a wooden-headed approach of the kind that we have followed in the last several decades is something which is not going to work. And it will not be able to break the log jam. Besides these imperatives, there are two more reasons to be optimistic about the future of Pakistan-India relations. One is that Pakistan-India relations are essentially political in nature and not ideological. For example, on Kashmir, our formal position is based on the UN Security Council resolutions and Shimla Agreement. And secondly, much of the bitterness and mistrust that has existed between the two people, it goes back to the experience and trauma of the partition of 1947. And I think the present generation is removed from that period. My own experience of having been posted to India for 4 years also tells me that there is a wealth of goodwill that exists between the people of the two countries. As regards the peace process, for the last several years, we have been following a three-track approach. One is the composite dialogue. Under this composite dialogue, we used to discuss all the issues: Jammu and Kashmir, Siachen, Sir Creek, water issues, terrorism, people-to-people contacts, economic issues, as well as nuclear stability and strategic restraint. The second track was the CBM track, and I put the CBM track a separate track from the composite dialogue because sometime while we would we would agree on some of the CBMs during the composite dialogue process, but most of the time when the leadership of the two countries would meet either in UN or elsewhere, they would also agree to these CBMs. And I think in the last several years, we have been able to agree to a number of very important CBMs, including CBMs related to Jammu and Kashmir and also CBMs related to nuclear risk reduction. And the third track that we have been pursuing and which has also been revived in recent years is the track to the back channel track. In this, under the back channel, we have been discussing Jammu and Kashmir. We have been discussing Siachen and Sir Creek issue. And I think some significant progress had been made under this process. As regards the current trends, the dialogue process is suspended since December 2012. I won't go into the details as to why the dialogue remained suspended. Perhaps I could answer that during the question-answer session. We have our perception as to why it has remained suspended. Indians have their own perception. But I think some of the recent developments, they generate a lot of hope between our two people. One is that in Pakistan, we have a new government, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who became the Prime Minister last year. His vision is economic development and peace and prosperity in the region. So the slogan in Pakistan is economic development through peace. And there is a strong realization that unless there is stability in the region, you can't achieve your economic potentials. And this is something on which the entire policy framework is geared to in Pakistan. And I think on the economic front, there have been some very positive indications in the last 6 months, which have been acknowledged by the World Bank, IMF, and other financial institutions. we we also feel, Prime Minister, that without resolving issues, without building peace with India, we will not be able to develop economically. And we need to make a common cause against common enemies like terrorism, extremism, poverty, etc. And for this purpose, back channel has been revived, and the Prime Minister in the back channel, again, all issues are being discussed which are of importance to the two countries, including terrorism. And the proposal that we have made to the Indian side is to develop a serious mechanism on terrorism, because this is an issue of great importance. And this level, this mechanism should be at such a level that people should be able to take notice of the things which are brought to each other's attention and should be able to take a decision. What we feel that if this mechanism is held at the national security advisors of the two countries, perhaps it would be better. Because I think again on this issue, rather than cooperating, we have been trying to blacken the face of each other whenever any incident will take place. So I think the concerns are mutual, but important thing is that we address those issues. The Prime Minister, Pakistan, he had also attended the inauguration ceremony for which he was invited by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And I think the bilateral meeting that took place between the two Prime Ministers, that was also held on a very positive line. The chemistry was absolutely wonderful, and the subsequent exchanges which have taken place between the leadership of the two countries will also generate a lot of hope between the two countries. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier, that now the question, now that the government is in position in India, the question would be that how would the relationship between Pakistan and India would shape up after the new government has taken charge. Will the election outcome accelerate or slow down this peace process between the two countries? Will the new government in Delhi be able to revive the dialogue process, which has been suspended for the last almost 2 years? And will the government display the courage and wisdom to grapple with the issues which are of concerns to both India and Pakistan, rather than pick and choose issues of interest to either side? And will the domestic politics in India continue to dictate policy, India's policy towards Pakistan? Because we have a very strong perception that that has also an important factor in not moving forward on some of them. I think the clear answers to these questions will obviously emerge after some time, but for this discussion, I can think of 3 scenarios that can come to our mind. The first is, of course, the on-off diplomatic engagement with little or no mitigation of mutual suspicion and mistrust while it remains high. Unfortunately, this is the scenario that we have pursued for the last many years, for several decades. In this scenario, obviously, the dialogue becomes just a means to restate positions, and this is something that we have been doing in the last many years. We used to often, since we, despite all the tensions, we have a very good working relationship with our colleagues in the Indian Foreign Service. And there was a joke between the two of us that these talking points are the ones that we made in 1950. So this is the kind of a situation that has Um, uh, this is, I think, the most volatile scenario because it has the potential to relapse into escalation of tension and heightening the risk of an uncontrollable crisis. And this scenario also unwittingly hands over to the militant groups on both sides to call the shots, and who can sort of ignite fresh rounds of tension between the two countries. The second scenario is one of managed tensions. In this, differences and disputes continue in a no war, no peace situation, but both political and diplomatic tools are employed by both the countries to ensure that the tensions do not spin out of control. This is the scenario that we have been following since 1998, ever since both India and Pakistan went nuclear. But this scenario only helps to avoid confrontation or breakdown in the relationship. This also provides space for some normalization. For instance, people-to-people contacts, trade, but the trade, which when I left India in 2003, the trade has its own dynamic. I think the government did make some efforts. The trade has registered an impressive growth from $300 million when I left India in 2003 to almost to more than $3 billion in the now, and I think we have agreed to take it to 5 billion by 2015, which is the kind of growth trajectory that we have followed. This is an achievable target. But I think without the broader context being addressed and a fraught strategic environment being eased, it will not lay the foundation of a durable peace between the two countries. This scenario certainly does not offer an assurance of a stable relationship. Instead, it will remain accident prone, and this is something that we have witnessed, that even while we were trying to manage this relationship, the dialogue process continued to get disrupted from time to time. The third scenario, which I think the most desirable scenario, and that's what we aspire to pursue, is the one whereby both countries adopt a problem-solving approach and engage meaningfully to find a negotiated solution of their issues, while identifying and building on areas of convergences in an effort to achieve strategic stability. In this scenario, obviously, sincere efforts will be made, directed at confronting and addressing the causes, not just the symptoms of the tensions. In this scenario, obviously, we will build trade ties, people-to-people contacts, and also encourage the peace constituencies on both countries to serve as the foundation of a long-term rapprochement. But this would be necessary but not sufficient to build durable peace. And I think the settlement of disputes, issues in accordance with the international legality would be something, I think, which would establish a permanent peace. I think it is the realization of the third scenario that on which the peace hinges in South Asia. The kind of developments, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, which are taking place in India and Pakistan, I think that also gives a very positive hope to the people of the two countries. As I mentioned, that the respective agendas of the two prime ministers, the economic revival and peace, they converge. the understanding reached between the two prime ministers to revive the dialogue process at the level of the foreign secretaries of the two countries, who would be meeting soon. I think that also generates hope, and our hope is that that would be the first step towards building a productive, cooperative, and tension-free environment between the two countries. Let's stop here, and I think we can have further discussions. Thank you so much.